time in a church as you're teaching and leading is begin with a topic that no one wants to talk about. So guess what we're going to do today? We're going to talk about a topic that no one wants to talk about. But here's what I love. As we've been going through the book of Luke and walking through the parables specifically in the book of Luke, one of the great reasons I love just kind of walking through books this way is you can't really skip the hard things to talk about. And it's like if you do, it's very commonly known that you skipped the harder messages. And so I'm very grateful that Landis next week is going to be teaching on hell. And so I'm very excited about giving him that opportunity. Honestly, we chose that beforehand, but I am excited that Landis is coming next week. But today, Chris gets to talk about the topic of money. And I'll be quite frank with you, I think this one is one that people don't want to talk about more than what Landis is going to be entering into next week. So I'm very excited to kind of dive into this. Now, let me just go ahead and say this. This is the week where, as you've been inviting people, you're like praying that they actually don't show up, right? And I'm not even going to lie. Like I met a lady in the parking lot a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, Lord, I mean, if she comes today, it's your will, but if she does not and wants to come next week, that's okay. And, right, because it's like one of those where you're holding it. And so if you're here with us this morning and this is your first time here, here's what we do. We teach the Bible. And one of the things that encompasses teaching the Bible is talking what Jesus talked about. And did you know this? Money is talked about more than love and forgiveness combined in the scriptures. Did you know that there are about 2,350 verses that reference kind of wealth and money and possessions in some sort of way? Did you know that out of the 38 parables that are in the gospel accounts, that 16 of them deal with money and possessions and wealth in some sort of way? That there are 800 specific verses on financial topics like savings and debt? And I think here's the reason why. Because it has the competition of our hearts with Jesus. It has the competition of our hearts with Jesus. And so one of the things that we want to do is teach it from a biblical standpoint. And as we walk through these parables that we find in the book of Luke, we come to one today that talks about the topic of money. You see, if something is important to us, we talk about it. And if we're being really honest, we talk about finances a lot. Now, we might not think about that, but we really do. Right? We dream and think about the homes that we're going to have or buy or places. We talk about vacations. We discuss meals. We talk about buying groceries. We talk about the cars that we want to drive. We talk about salaries and job opportunities and all of those things. It's something that consumes a lot of our time. And so quite frankly, if it's going to consume a lot of our time, we probably need to see what it is that Jesus says about it, right? And maybe base our thoughts and ideas based on what it is that Jesus talks about. Because if something is that important in our worldly and our fleshly lives, then I think it would benefit us to know what Jesus thinks about it from an eternal standpoint. And what we find out today as we get into this parable is that Jesus is very clear on wealth and possessions and what we should do with them and how we should manage them. In fact, before I ever even get started with this, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the bottom line of the parable. I don't know if you know this, but parables typically only have one point. It's not a bunch of different points that arise from them. Now, we can look at them from different angles, but if you read the parables, you find out that they have one point that they focus on, and today's parables, one point that Jesus mentions in it when we get to it in verse 9 of Luke chapter 16 is the fact that we should manage our money to make friends. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. We'll get into what that actually means. But ultimately, this parable says that we should manage our money to make friends. Now, this doesn't say that having money gets you friends, right? But we should manage our money to make friends. There's a big difference between those two. The way that we manage our money shapes our hearts, right? If you think about going to a nice, quiet, peaceful river where water is flowing and there's no cell phone service and no kids are around you, and you look at and pick up a rock from that river, that rock is usually very smooth, right? You pick it up and it's soft and smooth in nature, and it's fascinating. You know why? It's because the natural flow of that river shapes that rock over time. And in the same way that that rock is shaped by the flow of water rushing down from the mountain, our hearts too are shaped by the flow of money in and out of our lives. And so the way that we manage our money is very, very important. So do me a favor, turn to Luke chapter 16. That's going to be looking at verses 1 through 13. If you're picking up one of those Bibles in front of you, that's page 875 of those. You can download your favorite app that has the Bible on it, YouVersion or others. Or if you're like, man, Chris, none of those options are good, I tell you what, I'll just look at them on the screen. You can do that as well because we'll have the verses on the screen. We're coming to this parable of a dishonest manager. And here's what I love about this. Not only is it a fantastic parable, but it's also one of the strangest parables that you really dive into. I mean, there's some unique aspects about this parable that as you read it, you kind of step back and go, is that really Jesus mentioning what he mentions in this parable? It's one of my favorite in all of the scriptures. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray and just dive in to Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. Father, thank you that we don't get to avoid hard topics. But thank you also that you discuss and give us guidance for each hard topic that we may face in our life through your word. Father, I pray that as we dive into this, that right now you'll kind of settle our hearts just a little bit. For those that are thinking, man, I came to church today and we're talking about money, and that's the one thing I think churches talk about all the time. Lord, I pray that you would settle their heart. Or for those that say, man, I'm good here, I pray also that you would settle their heart as well. Father, but for those that are hurting just a little bit, this is all too familiar, talking about the means and the resources and the time, talent, and treasures that we have in our life, and maybe how we think they're void right now, especially after the past couple of years that we've had. Lord, I pray that you would settle their hearts, to let them know that you're faithful, you're good. God, you give us every answer that we need as we pick up these scriptures to read and dive into today. I pray that you would speak to us straight from your word. Father, we love you and we praise you for all of this, and it's in your son's name that we pray. Amen. So Jesus, at this point, as we've been walking through these parables, he's been talking to Pharisees and tax collectors. Pharisees and scribes, right? So he's basically talking to the religious types. And I don't know about you, sometimes talking to the religious types aren't so fun, right? Because they're judgmental. I think they're thinking about things that they shouldn't be thinking about. They're not focused on the bottom line. And so Jesus has been talking to them, answering the questions about why he's hanging around tax collectors and sinful, hurtful, harmful, those people, right, is what these religious types are saying. And what happens is Jesus is talking to them, and then all of a sudden, as we get into chapter 16, Jesus kind of turns and focuses his attention on his disciples. He's going from answering questions about what he's doing to hey, I'm getting back to what's important here, which is making disciples who make disciples. I want this thing to continue on, so I'm going to focus on these men over here so that they can also focus on others who will teach others also, as 2 Timothy 2:2 says, which is one of the reasons we have disciple-making groups here, is because we want to focus our attention on what moves the ball down the field. And Jesus dives in chapter 16, going back to his disciples, trying to move the ball down the field to teach them what it looks like to be living the life of a Jesus follower. And so in verse 1, he's sitting here and he says, now he said to the disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. Say the word possessions for me. Just even kind of hurts as we say it a little bit because we start to think of ours, right? He squanders his possessions. So they called the manager in and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you can no longer be my manager. Some translations very briefly and bluntly here say, get your report in order because you are going to be fired, right? And I can't help but to think of you're fired, right? I mean, it's just over and over in my mind from reality shows of days gone by. But this manager of this master, this wealthy man's possession, has done a terrible job. He squandered away his possessions, much like the prodigal son squandered away, living in a prodigal way, right? The word squandering coming in that meaning of prodigal. And he's squandered away these possessions. So maybe you're a business owner in the room and you know this feeling that you're not thrilled that someone that you placed in charge of something didn't do what you placed them in charge to do, and so they've squandered it, and so it's time to break ties, right? And so this manager is like, okay, I've wasted his possessions. I've wasted what he wanted me to do. And so the master is saying, I'm moving in another direction. Get ready, it's coming. So the manager probably has a lot going through his mind, right? He's probably thinking, uh-oh, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And I think some of us may have been there, and we even see that, yes, this is exactly what he's thinking, because in verse 3, he goes on, it says, then the manager said to himself. Man, again, like each week we're saying, these people talk to themselves a lot, right? I don't know about you, but we do as well. And I'm like, I can feel myself in here. He's like, oh man, I'm saying to myself, what will I do since my master is taking the management away from me? He's like, uh-oh. What now? I've done a terrible job. What now? What am I going to do since I'm getting fired by the management? He says, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I don't know about you, but maybe you've sat there at some point and you've thought, uh-oh, what now? Right? Maybe you saw the writing on the wall coming. Maybe you did not like where you were. Maybe a job was not what it turned out to be or what you thought it was going to be before you took it, and you're sitting there thinking, what now, right? And this manager is very much in this process. And so what does he do? He starts to go, well, I don't know what I can do, but let me list a couple of things I can't do. I'm not a strong guy. I don't like physical labor, so I'm not going to be digging any ditches anytime soon, right? I mean, he literally says here, I'm not strong enough to dig. My guy does not like physical labor. So I like physical labor, but I can resonate with him. Like I'm not digging ditches all day long, right? As I'm carrying around Bibles and commentaries and those types of things. But he also then says, you know what? And not only can I not dig ditches, which was common back then, I am way too prideful and going to be way too ashamed to ask anybody if they can give me money. So I'm not going to be doing that either. So he's starting to list these things that he can't do. And when I read this, I just can't help but to sit here and think, like, have you ever sat there and thought, like, God, what will I do next? Where should I go? And maybe you are in that season right now where you are uncomfortable or God's kind of stirring or wrestling with you, and you're thinking, what in the world should I do, Lord? And, you know, I was reminded this week as I was reading it that one of the safest places we can be when a what next moment comes up for us is identifying, understanding, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that our identity isn't wrapped up in any of those types of jobs, but our identity as followers of Jesus is wrapped up in what it is that God has called us to do. So I don't know, maybe you're sitting here right now and you're thinking, what is next? I would go ahead and venture to say this: whatever it is, line up with what it is that God has given you, the ability, the passion, and in the context that you can do it in. Right? Think about the abilities that God has given you. Think about the passions that God has given you, and then put the right context in there, and that's what you should do next. Don't sit there and think, what next? Know without a shadow of a doubt who it is that God has made you to be and lean into that fully. That's one of the things that we want to do here at Riverside time and time again is point you to the life that God has called you to. Not push you to an area, but we want to help you identify the abilities, the passions, and the context that you can do exactly what it is that God has called you to do. Because we know that these what next statements are going to come up time and time again, like my manager here, and we'll have an answer for him, maybe not like what we'll find out in verses 5 through 7. And so he says, he's thinking to himself, what next? What do I do? I'm not digging. I'm not going to, I'm too prideful to go ask people for money. So he says, you know what? I know what I'll do. Again, we've got a guy talking to himself inside of this story. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their homes. So he summoned each one of his master's debtors. Not his debtors, but his master's debtors. And he says, how much do you owe my master? He asked the first one. First one says, well, it's a weird question, but okay. Verse 6, it says, 100 measures of olive oil, he said. Take your invoice, he told him, and sit down quickly and write 50. He cut that bad boy in half. Verse 7, he said, next he asked another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat, he said. Take your invoice, he told him, and write 80. Now, I love this because this manager is like, he's like, okay, here's the deal. I'm about to get canned. I'm about to be out on my feet. I'm about to not have a place to stay because I'm not going to have anywhere to go. You know what I'll do? I'll make some friends so that when I have no place to go, I can sleep on their couch and like hang out, right? Anybody have a friend like that? No, don't raise your hand because they might be here, right? That's it. Don't do that. Don't implicate yourselves. He's sitting there thinking, man, I tell you what, I am going to make so many friends that when I am down and out, when I'm out on my feet, I am going to come out here and I'm going to go, hey, you remember that time I cut your invoice in 50%? Like 50%? Yeah. I need to sleep on your couch tonight. and that guy's going to go, yeah, you saved me a lot of money. You saved me a lot. Because, see, since we typically do not, like, deal with measures of olive oil and wheat, I don't know, maybe you do for your businesses. I don't deal with olive oil and wheat very often. I have no idea what this means. And so let me just break down what it is that this manager is doing. See, 100 measures of olive oil is about 150 trees. So you had to be very wealthy to own that type and that number and that quantity of trees. You know how much it was worth? Anywhere between 2 and 3 years' wages is what 150 olive trees is worth. So that's a lot of olive oil, by the way. I don't know what they were doing with it, but that's a lot of olive. There's a lot of anointing going on back then. There's 2 to 3 years' wages worth of olive oil that's there. And so what does this manager do? He says, hey, I know how I can get some friends. I'm not just going to sleep on the couch. I'm going to be in the guest room because I'm going to cut out a year to a year and a half salary here. I don't know about you, but if somebody saved me a year to a year and a half's wages, and they stay in my house as long as they want. I mean, I just like, that's good. That's good money. And then bushels of wheat. So it says 100 bushels of wheat, or this is 1,000 bushels, ultimately, maybe in your versions that you have. That's 10 years' wages. 10 years' wages. And so what does he do? Cuts it by 20%. He says, hey, I'm going to cut it by 20%. You're saving 2 years' wages worth of wheat. My guy was getting after it. So as I'm reading, I sit there and I'm going, man, this poor guy. Jesus is about to lay the woodshed on him for acting in such a deceitful, kind of fraudulent way here, right? I mean, like your mind, if you're not familiar with the story, you sit there and you go like, man, he is about to get just absolutely lambasted in public with all these people for acting so fraudulently and deceitfully in this story. He's going to condemn this dishonest manager. He's going to state how poor that decision was and so much more, right? Wrong. This is where it just gets a little bit weird and kind of interesting at the same time, because Jesus doesn't do that at all in the scripture. Pick up with me in verse 8 as Jesus describes what the master is going through. It says in verse 8, the master praised the unrighteous manager. Some of your versions say commended the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light in dealing with their own people. Some of your translations say that sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. This commend, this kind of praising of him. This is public display, and in a very formal way, this master is praising this shrewd manager. Shrewd here just means clever. Like he's going, this is a clever guy for what he just did with making sure he's taken care of in the future after I fire him, right? Master is praising him for being clever in his business practices. And this is weird for me. This rich master is admiring a shrewd, clever, deceitful manager by the words of Jesus here in this story. But understand this, you can admire something without also condoning it, right? You can admire something without condoning it, and that's what's going on here. Now, very simply, like I was talking to my boys this week, my youngest son loves Lamar Jackson. Not today, he doesn't. Right? And I can admire Lamar Jackson running all over the place. He's the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens. They're playing the Broncos in just a couple of hours. And so he's on his fantasy team and he's loving it, right? And so I can admire what Lamar Jackson can do, but today I do not condone it whatsoever. I don't condone him doing any of those things. Or maybe if you've ever heard stories, think like thieves that go to like extra above the effort kind of effort to do what it is they do. Like I'm thinking like Ocean's 11 type of like thievery and like, type of stealing type of things. Like sometimes I'm like, man, that took a lot of work. Like they put some effort into thinking about how they can do that. I don't condone it, but like I can step back and go, okay. I mean, like, well done trying that. I mean, I don't condone you doing it, and it's not going to end well, but you can admire things without condoning them, and that's what we see here. There's admiration without condoning. And what we see here when he mentions the sons of this world and the sons of light, or the children of this age, than the children of light here, is that Jesus reminds his followers, he reminds his disciples that they are not as clever in dealing with their future from an eternal standpoint as these people are that don't follow him are dealing with their future. And I'll just be real frank with you. Too often, I know a ton of people that do not know Jesus, would not claim to follow Jesus. They're more worried about their future that is going to rot away here on earth than we are our future from an eternal standpoint. And that's exactly what Jesus is getting at here. He's saying that the sons of this world manage their money with their future in mind, but the followers of his do not. It leads them into talking about the main point of this parable. See, he's saying that the non-followers of Jesus lack a buy-in with an eternity in mind, but followers of Jesus stand on the edge of eternity, and we don't use our time, talent, or our treasures with that in mind whatsoever. We do occasionally, we do maybe sporadically, but do we do it in the same shrewdness that this manager does? And I think what we'll do is we're going to find out the main meaning of this parable, but then also learn three truths about how to manage our money. And the first one goes back to our original point. We need to manage money to make friends. Look at verse 9 with me. Verse 9 says this. It says, and I tell you, make friends. See how clever I am? I'm not clever at all, but he says, make friends for yourself by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, do me a favor, say the word fails. And do me a favor, if you know that your money and your treasures and those things that we put our hope in are fading and going away and fails us every time, just say amen. We know that the hopes of this world fail and fade us time and time and time again. So he says that when it fails, not if it fails, not it might fail, but when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. Now, let me tell you what this doesn't mean. This doesn't mean use your money to make friends. Just like buying friends. I joked with some people before. I was sitting there talking. I was like, when I was in college, I was not involved in a fraternity or sorority. And that's large part because I had a built-in group. For those that don't know, I'll go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. I was a cheerleader in college, so I had my own group of 20 to 30 people that I hung out with all the time. And so I used to joke and say, man, I don't need to be in a fraternity or sorority. I don't have to buy my friends, right? I mean, that's kind of like the joke in college. This is not what we're saying here. We're not saying manage money to buy some friends. We're not saying manage your money so that people want to hang out with you. What we're talking about here is Jesus is saying manage your money so that you make friends from an eternal standpoint. Do things with your time, your talent, and your treasure so that it makes a kingdom impact and not just something that's going to fade away with the washing world that fades away and fails us every single time. He's saying that we should make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. You see, what is absolutely true from this statement is that we're to use our wealth, our money, our possessions, our time, our talents, our treasures to win eternal friends. We should do things with an eternity in mind as we use all of those resources. That may come from the way you use your money to aid your friends or your neighbors, right? You may have some friends or neighbors in need, and that may come from helping them out with your resources. Last year, Libby and I, my wife, we bought toilet paper. Because for whatever reason, that was the thing that was lacking in COVID. Still trying to find out why toilet paper was the thing. But we all remember, it was all right, let's go give them some toilet paper. We were all stars on our block because we bought toilet paper, right? But like using our resources to go and help them in that type of way was helping to open up a conversation to point them on a journey with Jesus. We were using our resources to try to have eternal conversations, to point them and have eternal friendships in there. Maybe that's doing things to just help them in need with your time or with the talents that the Lord has given you. Maybe that's going out on a date night with them somewhere downtown. So instead of just talking about a nice, well-cooked, medium rare steak from like Garden Grace or somewhere like that, like over that meal, you can talk about the things of God. Maybe you use your resources very intentionally so that you can point people towards a journey with Jesus. Maybe you want to vacation with them and you spend your resources so that you can go and spend endless amounts of time with them on vacation and find out more about them and point them to a journey with Jesus. That's what he's saying. Use your money, manage your money in a way that makes eternal friendships, not ones that are just sitting here wasting away and will fail us. Instead of using your resources personally to have nicer cars, bigger boats, mountain homes, and all of those things, maybe it's very intentionally working with what it is that God has given you so that you can make friends and point them to a journey with Jesus, an eternal conversation with them. See, in fact, the only wealth that you have right now that will endure or will be those things that you use that point to eternity, right? Your home will pass away. Your clothes will pass away. Your cars will rot and get older. All of those things are great, but they are staying here on this side of heaven. And so what we need to do is invest in things that have gospel impact, that have kingdom impact. That's what Jesus is saying here, gospel friendships. Church, the question you have to ask yourself is, right now, are you using your money in a way that would bring others closer to God? Is use of your money making eternal friendships? Because we should manage our money to make friends. But then secondly, Jesus tells us that we should also manage it to model trust. Look at verses 10 through 12. And by the way, these verses have been pulled out and kind of used in isolation together before in ways that are not good and not healthy and don't mean what they actually mean. And so you have to look at verses 10 through 12 here. It says in verse 10, whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. We use and abuse that in church settings. We say, man, if I'm faithful over here in these little things, then God's going to give me more, right? We have people that are kind of prosperity driven that say, man, if I'm just faithful over here with this little amount of money, God's going to give me more. No, like absolutely not true. Could God do that? Would God do that? 100%. But that is not what these verses mean. See, if you keep reading, they're together. It says, whoever is faithful in little is also faithful in much, and whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. Ooh, sometimes we forget that. Then in verse 11, it says, so if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? If you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you what is your own? We've misused that for far too long. Here's what it means. It has nothing to do with small amounts of money turning into big things of money. Here's what it means. If I am not even faithful with the things God gives me to steward here on this earth, these unrighteous, worldly types of things, why in the world would he give me godly things that I can take care of? If I am not faithful in these things in my own home, using my money to have eternal conversations and friendships, why in the world would he entrust things of God to me? As a church, if we're not faithful over here with the small things that we're being given, why in the world would he entrust us with things that we long for and desire to see happen here on Alcott Street? That's what this passage is talking about. If you aren't managing something worldly well, why in the world would you be managing things that are eternal well? I think this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks in our relationship with Jesus. Just look at the American debt that we have from consumer debt standpoint. On average, American debt's about $93,000. And I think Jesus is sitting there going, if you can't manage these things well, why would I give you more? Why would I give you more important things, more responsibility, eternal things, mission types of things, evangelistic type of things, discipleship and disciple-making types of things to worry about? You see, a way for us to model trustworthiness is to use our money for spiritual things like building bridges for eternal friendships. Manage your money to make friends. And if we don't have margin in our resources to be able to do that, if we aren't giving back to the local church in a way that God commands us to, then how in the world is the Lord supposed to entrust us with spiritual matters? You see, church, at the end of the day, we're just stewards of all of God's resources. It is not your own. I don't know where you line up on the power and the sovereignty of God, but He is in charge. He is in control. We are made in His image, not the reverse way. And so in that way, we are stewards of everything it is that God has given us to steward. This building, this campus, these resources, we are stewards of what it is that God has given us to steward. And He's saying, if you can't even take care of these small worldly, fleshly things, why in the world would I give you all of this over here? Theologian Martin Luther said it this way. He said, therefore, we must use all these things upon earth in no other way than as a guest who travels through the land and comes to a hotel where he must lodge overnight. It says he takes only food and lodging from the host, and he says not that the property of the host belongs to him. Just so, we should also treat our temporal possessions as if they were not ours and enjoy only so much of them as we need to nourish the body and to help our neighbors with the balance. Thus, the life of the Christian is only a lodging for the night, since we have here no continuing city, but must journey to heaven where the Father is. We should look at how we steward the resources that are not ours, but they are God's. We should manage our money to make friends. We should manage our money in a way that models trust for other people. And then last, but certainly not least, we must manage our money to manifest priorities. This word manifest is just to show, to claim, to push out what our priorities are. Look at verse 13. We've heard this also said time and time again. It says, no servant can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot, say the word cannot, serve both God and money. You notice how he didn't say you should not, or it's going to be really hard to, or you can try, but it's going to be difficult. No. He said you cannot serve both God and money. Jesus doesn't give any middle ground here. Now, quickly, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying wealth is bad. I want to wrap this up with this. I'm not saying, well, like, I like nice things. Like, that's a little bit of who I am, right? I like nice things. I'm not saying that nice things are bad. I'm not saying that your home is bad. I'm not saying that your car is bad. I'm not saying that your vacations are bad. I'm not saying any of those things. By the way, on the flip side, the recovering sales rep in me wants to also tell you that this is not the opportunity to talk your significant other into the mountain home so you can make some eternal friends, right? It's like, hey, babe, I know we've been talking about this, and if we want to make some friends, like Chris said, make friends. And so this is like, it's a word from God that we need that motorcycle, that boat, that home, that whatever it is, so that we can make some friends, right? And so, Liv, I got some things I want to talk about afterwards. No sales pitch here. This is not damaging what it is in our wealth. This is not a sales pitch to do whatever it is. This is just flat out saying that we are stewards of something that God has given us with our time, talents, and our treasures, and that we absolutely have to steward it. And when we think about having a posture of stewarding, that shows who it is we're serving. Because if it's our possessions, it's our wealth, it's our time, it's our treasures, it's our talents, then I'm just using me to serve God over here. But if it's His time, His talents, His treasures, His resources, now He's my master. So I have to make sure that I have the right posture that says I am manifesting the right priorities to everybody, that I am serving God. He is not serving me in what I want to do with my time, talents, and my treasures. God owns all of it. We simply manage it. If it's any other way around, then there's a theology problem there, nothing else. That's what we see in the scriptures. You see that what usually happens is that our money is managed by other decisions in our life instead of us managing it. And when it comes to things of a spiritual nature, making eternal friends, we often see these. I have a friend named Aaron Brockett, and he says there's a 3S giver. So in terms of generosity and giving back and using time, talent, and treasures, there's a 3S giver, and that's one, we do it spontaneously. So, yep, over there, and then we have no idea when it's going to come again, and we'll give, in that type of way. This is my own background in terms of giving back to God what is His with my time, talent, my treasure. It's just like very spontaneous, right? Or even sporadic. Like maybe it's not just spontaneous, but then it becomes a little sporadic, like here and there. There's no consistency for it, but it's like, I kind of know that I need to be doing this, so I'll do it. And then last, the third S is sparing. We give like a bottom amount, what we can get away with giving, not what we can give in order to trust that God would supply it back in any type of way, not in order to give in a way that would say, hey, I'm using this for sure to make friends from an eternal standpoint. And what we need to do is become a 3P giver, or we can even say a 4P giver. As I was talking about this with Libby this week, she reminded me of maybe one more P that was very important. Because see, here was my 3 Ps. I said premeditated. Like I need to premeditate the way I'm going to give back of my time, talent, and treasures, not just sporadically, but I need to think about it. I need to think through it. I need to walk it out, maybe even write it out, maybe claim it and say, hey, this year, this month, this quarter, I'm doing this in order to make friends from an eternal standpoint with my time, my talent, my treasures. I should do it proportionate to now. I don't know about you, but at one point when I really kind of decided to give back to God what was His, I did it like I was in my 20s, and like I don't make the same amount that I make now, right, then as I do now. And so it was like, hey, I don't need to carry on my 20s all the way into my 40s. And so I maybe need to do it proportionate to what it is today, because those are God's resources that He's given me today, not just back then, right? And then the other one was a percentage. For those that have a background of familiarity with church, this is where the word tithe comes from. It's a tenth back to the storehouse, right? Like here's the thing about a percentage, and nobody's sitting here saying, if you don't give a tenth, then you don't love Jesus. No, that's between you and Jesus. That's your heart with Him. But I guarantee you this, if you say that you're going to give back a percentage of your time, your talents, and your treasures, then you're more likely to do it than not at all. Because if you aim for nothing, you'll hit it every time. If you aim for nothing in this area, you will hit it every single time because the world will take it away from you. And then so my wife, who kind of said, hey, what about prayer? That's a pretty good P to add in there, right? That would maybe encompass all of that, premeditated, proportionate, and percentage. I should pray and ask God what He wants me to do with His resources. Not mine, because they're not mine. They're His. And so as the team gets ready to come back up here, as we kind of go into our closing time frame, and for those new with us today, at the very end, we always kind of ask a question and want you to sit here and wrestle with God, not wrestle with Chris, not wrestle with Riverside, not wrestle with anybody else, but I want you to wrestle with God with the question here before you leave, because I want you to walk out of that door knowing what it is you're going to do based on God's word. Not me, not anybody else. And here's the question that you need to ask yourself. Is your intentional use of money bringing people closer to God? Very simply, is your intentional use of money bringing people closer to God? Because what I see in my Bible from my Jesus is that He wants us to use our resources in a way that brings people close to Him. He wants me to use my time and my talent and my treasures in a way that helps me make eternal friendships. He wants me to use my time, my talent, my treasures in a way that says, hey, I know a man named Jesus that gave me this ability to do this thing so that I could have these resources, so that I could talk to you about the work that He did on a cross. In fact, He died a death on a cross to take the place of my sins and yours. And He hung there, and then they took His body down, they put Him into a tomb, and 3 days later He rose again, so that I know without a shadow of a doubt that He was the Son of God. And then if I believed in that, if I asked Him to forgive me of my sins, and I placed my hope, my faith, my trust in Him, if I understood that He is the one to lead my life, if I understood that He is the one that wants me to manage my resources for Him and His kingdom and an eternity standpoint, and for you as well, then I would have a life forever with Him and a right relationship with God in eternity in heaven. That's the way he wants us to use our time, our talents, and our treasures. And so as we close, I just want you to bow your heads, and for about a minute, I just want you to ask yourself, are you right now using your resources in a way that is bringing people closer to God?